Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Sovereign University YouTube channel with Cuba Plus, and today I have the chance to be with Lisa. Lisa,
hey.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Good. We're in El Salvador for the end of Cuba Plus, this educational program to teach young Salvadorian. You know about it. We have like 14 videos of interviews so far. It's your first time in El Salvador, right?
That's right, yeah, first time.
So, Lisa, for anyone that don't know you, maybe there's some students that start on the Bitcoin journey and they're not really aware of all the company and who is building something. So, could you please explain to the audience what are you doing and who are you in the Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, totally. So my name's Lisa. I also go by Nifty Nye. I worked for Blockstream for about 5 years. So I've been working on Lightning specs for half a decade. Recently started working on kind of an education program called Base 58. The whole thing about Base 58 is we call ourselves a Bitcoin protocol school. So we really look to teach people about how the Bitcoin protocol works. We started with a transactions class last year. We had about 50 people go through it in the last year. We now have some of it online as an online class. And then last week, we had our first ever Lightning class. So we went through the Lightning spec protocol, talk about how Lightning works at the spec level. And so that's what I'm here in El Salvador to do, which I think you know about. I'm here to help teach the students about how Lightning specs are, what the specs are, how Lightning works at like a very, kind of the basic building blocks of what's going on when a Lightning payment moves through the system. What happens? What's going on? So that's very it's a very important thing, I think, to be able to understand how these systems work. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of people that really know how that happens. So, I'm kind of getting out there and talking to people and teaching them about, the basics of Bitcoin protocols.
That's so cool. Yeah, the kids here got 2 weeks of intensive classes. Now they're with Jimmy's song for the class. Just before, actually, if you follow the YouTube channel, we had an interview with one of the students, Benjamin, which is the kind of head of the class. And he told us he wanted to work at the protocol level because Peter told him, yeah, we still need to build stuff. So he was really into it. So I'm curious, what is your seminar about? If you had to do a template of what the kids will actually learn technically, what is it? Is it on C Lightning, I'm guessing?
Yeah, so I use Core Lightning. We call it Core Lightning now. We use Core Lightning in class. I need to set up, after this, I gotta go do a little bit of prep work to set up nodes, so they'll each get their own node. Mm-hmm. I think we're gonna set it up on Signet, so they'll have test Bitcoin. We'll be able to write things. So the general idea is that you'll get a really good understanding of what's happening when a Lightning node sets up a channel. What exactly are the steps that a node goes through when it sets a channel up? Where's the Bitcoin? What gets changed whenever a Lightning payment gets made? Part of that, so we'll kind of talk through all that. We'll learn about what an HTLC is and how those work. We'll look at the actual on-chain Bitcoin scripts. Mm-hmm. So you have a really good understanding of what you and your Lightning node hold, what the data requirements are for your node, why your nodes, backups are a difficult problem on Lightning. So hopefully we'll give everyone a really good understanding of that. From a technical side, I don't know how much time we'll have this time, but the 3-day class, we start writing Lightning plugins on Core Lightning. So you actually get the opportunity to practice holding an HTLC and seeing how that works. And then the last thing we were trying to do in class is writing our own pay plugin. So actually implementing all the parts of what you would need to make a payment happen on Lightning. That's a really cool activity to do. So so making a payment means you kind of have to understand a lot of the underlying parts of what's going on. You have to understand how to parse a Bolt 11 or an invoice, a Lightning invoice. So that's the whole thing. So then we can talk about what is Bolt 11, how do you parse it, where does it come from, what are the different parts. That's fun. The other thing you need to do is once you've figured out how to parse it, that'll tell you how much money you need to send and where you're sending it. Once you have that information, then you need to find a route to that person. So that lets you then talk about all the stuff about Lightning on the Gossip network. Mm-hmm. Gossip tells you where the channels are and how much it costs to route through them. And then your node gets to figure out how to kind of chart its own path to the destination. And then once you have the little path figured out, then you have to wrap that up in something we call an onion, right? So then you have to figure out how to package up that information in a series of kind of secret messages so that the people along the route have no idea where it's coming from and where it's going to. And then once you've done all those steps, then you can finally make the payment. And once you try and make the payment, there's usually errors that will come back. And we get to talk about why did it fail, what are the errors, how do we retry. We need to go through basically this whole process again, right? And try different things. So I think that's a really fun kind of like thing to think about and sort of like difficult problem to think through. Because there's like really no one right answer in how you build like a plugin that pays there's no really one right answer in how you make a payment on Lightning. There's a lot of techniques, there's a lot of things you can do. So it's sort of like this endless rabbit hole that if you're a new developer, hopefully in class you can get some of the basic building blocks of like ways to approach the problem, how to think about it. And then if you wanted to go on and build your own like best in class paid plugin that has like the best reliability, etc., you could do that on Core Lightning. It's really easy to add and build in new functionality to Core Lightning and like these little kind of self-contained applications. So, you know, in terms of like how are we getting new developers into Lightning, I really think that like the Core Lightning infrastructure, the way that it's been built out, makes it like really easy, I hope, for new devs to come in and kind of find a fun little problem to spend a lot of time in and not have to worry so much about writing C code or whatever. So we'll be using Python for all of our stuff because you can write cool new functionality into Core Lightning using Python if you want to, which is fun.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. So I'm wondering for the students, because that's already a really high level. To get there, we have a lot of educational resources. You have some. The whole Bitcoin community is getting together to really try to emphasize on education. On your side, how did you learn how to code? How did you end up here at building, like as you say, half a decade of Lightning infrastructure? It's a big promise. What would you say is your parkour? Not necessarily like the Bitcoin one, but more like the programming one. And what would be like the skill those students will like need to master to get to that point? That's one.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that like everyone's journey into figuring out how to contribute to the protocol is slightly different. I think that's kind of what makes it one of the harder things to get involved with, because there is no like, you know, like in programming, you talk about interfaces, right? Like kind of what are the available ways to interact with like a service in programming, or like, you know, what is the interface for how do you get into spec development? How does the interface to like, you know, sort of like getting into that sort of thing. I would say that for spec development, and this is across the board, not just in like the Bitcoin ecosystem, but also like over in the web spec ecosystem, et cetera, there isn't really like a well-defined pathway or like, you know, series of things you can do. It's like do X, Y, Z and you can become a spec developer. I think everyone who ends up doing it, their path is a little bit different. And it all kind of seems like this sort of weird, lucky, like, you know, thing you like happen to fall into. That being said, I think some of the things that are really, that are kind of, I think, common amongst the people who tell you the story about getting into open source is, one, they're part of a community where they were able to like see other people working on that stuff. And that gave them an idea that it's possible, one, that it's possible, two, that it's not like this super hard, I mean, it is a hard, difficult thing, and it requires a lot of deep knowledge and experience in order to make, I think, significant contributions, but there's kind of like this lower level that you can start at in terms of like just being able to read the implementation. Building your own toy implementation of a spec is usually a great way for people to see what you're doing. It also gives you a perspective on how to contribute back, like what kinds of, if you have questions while you're implementing things, that's a great, you can like post those to like the GitHub where they're listed, or like ask people in Discord. So it kind of, I think unfortunately the truth about getting involved with spec work is a lot of it is you have to do a lot of work on your own before people will start to notice you, or before you'll start having like enough experience to have like reasonable contributions to some of the stuff that's going on. That being said, like just reading the documents and offering up like spell checks or like, hey, this isn't clear, that kind of thing is all very useful work to do also. So I don't know. I don't feel like I really answered your question.
No, I think you did. I think the word that summarizes everything is curiosity, and like open-minded, and just like trying. We had Alekos and Daniela,
Oh, yeah.
you know them, and they all said like, yeah, we just learn by doing. We see something, we try to understand, and we create it, and we try again and again. And if you do that, at some point, if Bitcoin is your passion, if protocol level is your passion, you will end up helping. And also the second point, if I may summarize, is a helping open source project. Getting that reputation going is at the end of the day, one of the hardest things in Bitcoin because, like Peter said, we don't trust. And so you have to prove yourself if you want to push a BIP or whatever.
Yeah, I think so early in my dev career is pretty long. I've been working in software for over a decade. I started my career doing Android development. So I had almost over half a decade of doing Android work before I kind of decided I was done with Android and looked around for my next thing. I spent about a year doing like a React web app kind of stuff before getting back into like backend and falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But one thing that I learned kind of earlier in my career is like if you have a perspective on something, I feel like, in Bitcoin there's a lot of, we should do X, or like people will post suggestions to the mailing list. Like a lot of what you see at like the top level of like, why aren't we doing X? Or people will complain about X or Y. One thing that kind of got ingrained in me very early, and this was at like working at a company, not at, maybe this I learned it at Etsy, I kind of forget, but whenever you have like a suggestion, the best thing you can do is open a pull request that tries to implement the thing that you want. Mm-hmm. There's two things to this. One is like you shouldn't expect that pull request to be merged. It's really a conversation starter. I would expect, like, you're probably not going to do it the way that the person who's running the project wants it to be done. Maybe the solution you came up with isn't the right one, but it's a way more powerful and effective way to show that you've spent time thinking about the problem. You've gotten to know enough about what's currently happening in it to have like a good perspective, or at least the idea about how it should be done. And it shows that you're willing to like put the work in to try and make that happen. Also, it's like way more valuable to the ecosystem if everyone, when they suggest something that they want to be done, they also provide code with it. So that I think is like super useful. I feel like I didn't really answer your earlier question though about like how do you get into programming or developing in the first place, right? It's like, okay, I'm being like, okay, if you want something to change, you should post up like a code change, but I didn't say anything about like, well, how do you learn to make code changes, right? On y'all's platform, do you guys teach people about like how to get into dev, like the tools they need to be developers, or like?
Yeah, so that would be like the second layer of the school. So basically the school we're building, we have 12 courses so far, from Bitcoin 101, Lightning, Austrian economics, RGB, and Lightning node management or cryptography. Mm-hmm. And then for every course is basically, imagine as a pyramid. Mm-hmm. And so they select those courses, and then if there's like prerequisite at the lower level, where there's like math courses, dev courses, and then we want to build those prerequisite courses. So if they struggle on a Bitcoin course, then you can go down one layer to make like the foundation. And then at some point, if we have enough time, money, talent, and traction, we can probably go down one more layer to really give the basics. So they get the rabbit hole, but like they can just go up and down on the educational path. And since we are in Africa too, math and English is necessary for them to actually push it to the next level. So yeah, they do need basic programming skills before understanding Bitcoin. So it is the struggle that sometimes we have. We can push Bitcoin courses, but if they don't have the programming basics to do it, then it's kind of pointless. So it's a bit an issue. But
yeah, they call it like chicken and the egg problem a little bit, right? Yeah. This is like one thing that people ask me. So my first class at Base 58 is like just about the Bitcoin transactions protocol, right? Yeah. It's like, what is a Bitcoin transaction like as a document, right? Like if you think about it in terms of just like, what is a transaction? It's like, okay, it's a document. It's a document that the information is like written in kind of machine language, right? Like it's in bits and bytes, but just going through and understanding, okay, what's in this document. So it is a very like technical class. We do very technical things. We teach you how the Bitcoin script works. We teach you how the basic cryptography. We build ECDSA signatures by hand, so you get to see where the math is. You learn about SECP 256K1. And so that kind of assumes like basic algebra. We assume that you can use Python to like at least like open a Python replit, right? But I would say like for that class, you don't really need to know much about programming. We don't write programs. We're not doing like computer architecture. We're not like making you do for loops and that sort of thing. Like none of a Bitcoin transaction really requires any of that, which is kind of interesting. But it is like a highly technical class where you need to be like, I would say like bit and byte and encoding literate, right?
Like a parallel would be like with the Lightning routing system.
Yeah.
It's like we actually do want to have, we are working on the curriculum and should be out probably when that video comes out. What are the other routing type of example we can see in the world? The subway, the animals, the network, our brains, everything. And then from that, we can try to extrapolate and say, all right, if those naturally work as organisms, maybe we should get inspired to see maybe how the lightning whole graph should be represented. So they do need to get like network knowledge, which is not Bitcoin, but it is still Bitcoin, you know? It's
well,
like,
Bitcoin's adopted it, right?
Yeah.
We've made it such that you need to know that because we've decided that we want to route payments through networks, right? Nothing about designing Lightning necessarily meant that we needed to do network stuff, a network topology, but when they figured out how they're going to do off-chain payments, they decided that one of the best, most private ways to do that would be through these like private channels, right? And then all of a sudden you need network theory. So one of the things I like to do when I'm teaching stuff is motivate the solution. So it's like, okay, it's like, why do we need to learn this stuff? Like, what's the reason we need to know about how networks work? Well, we need to know about how networking works, and that's reasonable and like something that's applicable to the problem space of being a Bitcoiner now. It wasn't really before Lightning, right? You didn't really need to know that. But now it's like, okay, now we're trying to like route payments through these payment channels that is Lightning, right? Now it's like, okay, well now we need to know how to traverse a graph because we've built a graph. So I think there's a lot of things like that in Bitcoin where it's like, well, why am I learning this thing? And I think this is true for most education. If you're unable to explain to someone like why we're in this problem that we're in the first place, like why is there a network? It's gonna mean less. It's gonna have less meaning. And anytime you try and tell someone something that doesn't have as much meaning, there's not as much reason for them to pay attention, and like they don't have a place to put it in their like internal map of like why should I be learning this thing. So I think that's one thing that Base 58 we're particularly good at is I kind of like the Lightning class, for example, we spend a lot of time in class looking at the bolts. The bolts are public documents, right? For those of you who don't know what a Lightning bolt is, it's the basis of Lightning technology. It's just like a series of documents on GitHub that explains in very technical detail how a Lightning node works, right? Those are public. Those out there. Like you or me or anyone could go and read them today or tomorrow. Problem is they're very difficult for anyone to read, right? And so when you come through class, like what Base 58's goal to do, and we do this with transactions in our transactions class, we're doing this now with Lightning. I'm gonna do a Taproot class in September for the first time. So we'll be like going through Taproot for the first time soon. One of the reasons that what we really try to do with Base 58 is we like kind of tell the story of that protocol, right? So it's not just like this is how it works. It's like this is the problem we're trying to solve, and then we as a class maybe can think through like how are the different ways that we might solve that problem, and then it's like, okay, well let's look at the way that we actually did solve it as a community or as like a spec process. Not to say that the way that like the spec solve that problem is necessarily the one and only answer, right? It's like this is the one we arrived at, and this is why we are where we are, which is kind of cool and interesting.
It's cool. You're really trying to push pedagogy in your class, right?
Yeah.
You're telling me the students here will be like writing stuff, so you really to make it like activity, exercise, critical thinking, which is like so important.
Yeah, and like, I mean, so like, I think we were talking a little bit earlier, like, you're like, what are kids they're going to be doing in their class? Well, hopefully, like, they'll be writing a little bit of a plugin. Again, I'm not sure how much time we'll have.
They do already have a Signet node. I think it's LND. Most of them have been using LND for the hackathon before, but so they already know how to set up like a node. They already have their Bitcoin node in Signet, and they already had the Lightning Signet node on LND. To give you an idea of what.
So they have experience with the node. They kind of know what commands they need to call, etc. But one of the cool things about like being able to put the computers down and just walk through what's actually happening in real life, what the computers are actually doing, right? Because like each of these nodes has like, it's like what work is it doing? Like what is the work that a node is doing? If you don't have any idea about what kind of like job your node is like responsible for, and like what kind of things it's doing on your behalf, which is it's all stuff that's written in the protocol, right? But like, your node has like certain tasks and responsibilities that it is kind of taken over for you. a lot of that is like being able to talk to another node on your behalf. Like it knows how to set up like a communication channel so that it can have a conversation with another node over a private communication channel. So that's like part of the work that your node's doing. The other part is keeping track of like the balances and lightning channels. And it's like, okay, so what kind of stuff does it need to know in order to do that? Like what is the work of updating a balance in a channel? So that sort of thing, like that's really hard to look at in a computer. Nodes kind of like push all that such that you don't see them, right? Because that's like your agent in the computing world. It's doing all these things on your behalf. If it works well, you don't ever won't ever see any of that, right? Because it's this like magical little programmed agent that you ask to do things for you. So when you do an RPC call to it, you're like requesting it to do new things or take new actions and work because it knows how to do all those things. You've like delegated the knowledge of how to like set up a secret connection to another node to that lightning implementation, and then you can just request it to connect to a node and it'll like figure out how to do that for you, right? So like in class, you don't actually need to like look at the code to talk about what that work is that needs to be done. So what I developed this game that I'm working on trying to open source it so more people can do it, called the Bitcoin LARP. Have you heard of this? It's the live action role play.
All right.
So it's an opportunity for like a classroom group of people. You really need like 20 to 30 people to make it work, to like use paper and pen to play out the role of what a Bitcoin node is doing.
Right.
So like what work is a Bitcoin node doing? I've taken some of the stuff from that like exercise and sort of used some of the same paper and pencil concepts so that you can pair people up into node channels, right? Like make little node channels in class, and then every little pair has an opportunity to like visually for themselves try to do the work that their node is doing. And I think it really gives people like a good appreciation for one, like what's written in the spec. And then you can go look in the spec and be like, here's where, if we have a question about like, well, we ran into a situation, like we're like trying to do this thing that my node usually does for me. We're doing it on paper and pencil because humans really seem to be able to pick up more quickly when they can touch things. Because it just makes sense, right? Like you can see it, you can see the objects moving, you're actually having to write in the stuff for yourself. So you just have this really good visual understanding of like what's happening. It's cool like when you have a question then, or if like maybe I don't get something right or I'll need to go check something out, that's a great opportunity to be like, okay, and this is what a spec is good for, right? So you can go look up what the rules are for that interaction, like that's written in the spec, so to speak. So yeah, part of class is definitely like not all in the computers. I mean, all of the stuff that like the spec is doing is like written in these implementations. They're written in Go, it's written in C in the case of core lightning, it's written in Rust. There's a version in Scala, right? So like there's like all these different like code implementations that like, have examples of that, but most humans aren't very good at reading code. We're a little bit better at reading spec stuff, but even then that's kind of a specialized skill. But most people, if you give them pen and paper and sort of outline like what the steps are, they can think through it and they can like make that happen for themselves without actually having to like know how to read code. So for new people that are new, or even people that run Lightning nodes and don't know as much about the back-end stuff, it's like a really great kind of exercise and class to go through to like figure out what is actually happening. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. And your game is a good idea. I've created also an educational game, but more for like really beginners, not developers. And I think gamification to learn is something super important. And actually, one of the students has created a Bitcoin game. And during the hackathon, they created like a Bitcoin quiz game with questions. You'd pay like an invoice. You'd pay like with a LNURL thing to put some money. You play as a competitive game 1 against 1 on Bitcoin questions, fastest to answers, right questions. And in the end, the person can withdraw the whole package. So it was like a competitive lightning game. Lightning is a big topic. It's a really big topic. One of the struggling things I had at the beginning is understanding why do we have 3 implementations? Why do we have Eclair? Why do we have Core Lightning? Why do we have LND? So if we start going to that rabbit hole of discussion on like what they are, why 3, what are the specification of which one, I don't think I can have a better expert on my side than you. Why did you start with 3 implementation? And maybe the first question I have is like, so why? And how hard is it to communicate between all three to make it works together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're like always trying to make sure that like, I think it's an ongoing and like forever problem to make sure that the implementations like continue to interoperate, right? Like it's because all three, or there's four really now with LDK, five if you count the one Electrum has. There's a Python implementation, Electrum. They don't show up at spec meetings or really contribute too much back. So I don't hear from that team very much, but like, yeah, there are 5 implementations that I know of that of Lightning, right? And they're all in different languages. Why? It's a great question. I think one thing to really understand, so like, you know, again, I like telling the history because I think the history really motivates like where we are and why we are where we are. If you look, and part of the kind of historical comparison is doing comparisons, right? Have you heard this thing from like, I think is it Hegelian dialectic? You have like antithesis, antithesis, synthesis,
yeah.
Right? Basically, it's like, I think a good way of like seeing that, how that impacts how technical things get developed is you have like the original version of the thing, and then we'll kind of have a reaction to that thing. So in this case, the original version of the thing is the way that Bitcoin Core is specified. What do you know about the Bitcoin specification, like Bitcoin Core?
I know a lot, but you can keep going. Like people will know, but I mean, what do I know? I mean, what do you mean? What I know exactly? Like,
How many implementations of Bitcoin Core are there?
Honestly, I just know about Bitcoin Core from like the Bitcoin Core we get on GitHub, and then probably just one.
Just one, right?
Yeah.
And where is it written down how Bitcoin Core works? Like
White paper. No, I mean, but like.
Well, it's
yeah.
a white paper, but
And
that's
then
not really a
on the GitHub
specification, right?
on the GitHub I get all the info, and that's where I would like start bootstrapping everything, and then connect to the nodes of my peers, start downloading, and yeah, I guess from there.
Right, but like the work that Bitcoin Core does, like where is that written down somewhere? So if you had a question about what should happen in a situation when Bitcoin Core gets like a new transaction, is there like a document that like specifies exactly what you would expect to happen, or?
No, I check. No, I guess my mempool and then the GitHub. No, yeah, there's none. Oh, is there?
Right, yeah. So for Bitcoin Core, typically the general understanding is that the specification of how it should work is what's implemented in the code.
Yeah, okay.
So there's no
I got it right then. You scared me. Yeah, I was like,
there's no like separate document that describes exactly what you would expect to happen in each case that you can check what's written in the code against, right? It's basically sort of that. Recently, after Bitcoin Core got shipped, they started using the BIP process, the Bitcoin Improvement Proposals, I think.
Exactly.
And those are actually written documents of how certain things should happen and what cases you would expect certain behavior, right? Yeah, okay, so that's how Bitcoin works. So Lightning came like 5 or 6 years after Bitcoin, right? And we didn't want to be like Bitcoin. So this is the antithesis side of like that whole thing, right? It's like, okay, we don't want to be like Bitcoin, and that we don't want there to be a single implementation, and we don't want it to be undocumented. So the idea behind like the Lightning development process is that there would be 3 people working on independent implementations from the get-go, and they would all have one single unified document that was the bolts that would describe how a Lightning node should interoperate, how it should work. And so that way, you have 3 checks on whether or not what's written in the document is an accurate description. It's accurate enough to be able to re-implement a working Lightning implementation, right? And then now you have, I think the other cool thing is that like what you start getting then, and what Bitcoin is all about decentralization, right? Yeah. And Lightning kind of is like a very decentralized network, right? You really only need to be able to understand your network peers. There's a few things that are having understanding of those things across the network is very useful and necessary to do upgrades. But to a large extent, a lot of the only person you need to be able to communicate and be in understanding with is the peers that you're connected to and have channels with on the network. So it's also like very distributed in terms of like specification, right? The idea was that if we're building Lightning, having multiple teams that have a different way, that have like have implemented the same spec means that the spec becomes very important for keeping all of these different implementations like in sync and able to communicate and do the same work together, right? So the spec is kind of like the outline or the document of the shared understanding of what these nodes are able to do interoperate with. Not to say that LND or Core Lightning couldn't come up with their own little thing that only Core Lightning nodes could interact with each other over. But the spec is like the outline of the common stuff that all these nodes are able to, or at least most of them are able to do. The other thing you get when you start having these decentralized like code teams is now you've achieved a very, very difficult thing in software, which is you've decentralized the understanding of how Lightning works. So now there's not just one team with one source of funding, which is making Lightning a protocol. Now you have 3, or maybe I just mentioned like 4 or 5 teams, all with people, or at least 5 people in the world that have had to redo the specification, implement a Lightning node from scratch. So now, if one of those people was hit on by a bus, Lightning would still be a successful project. It might be a little bit of a setback to whatever they were working on, et cetera, in their particular project. But Lightning as a network would be able to continue to grow and thrive in all sorts of new directions and bring in new developers under like 3 or 4 different umbrellas and different ecosystems, et cetera. So I really think that that's like a really strong way of getting, it's just having a lot more entry points for people to get involved in Lightning and understand how it works. Whereas the Bitcoin core, there's really only one core team, right? I think that's like, sort of the Bitcoin core was done this way, and so Lightning was like, we're going to do it completely not like that. So we're going to do the antithesis of that. We're going to be as distributed as we can, both at the node implementation layer as well as the teams that know and understand, like the experts on Lightning now. And it's cool because now there's also even like distributed funding of all these teams. So every team has to go and find its own funding sources. Is it more expensive than having one team? Yes, but on a whole, decentralization tends to be more expensive that way, right? So, I think it's cool.
Yeah, no, I do think you agree. And so the process to push a bolt or to push something is completely different, and from the typical Bitcoin BIP type of proposal. And so you gave me the thesis, the antithesis. What is the synthesis?
I don't know what the synthesis is. I don't have like a good. I was like,
it sounded good. It sounded cool.
Right, but I think it's kind of one of those. If you can know what people were reacting to, you have a better understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, right? I don't think we've seen the antithesis. I don't know what that will be or look like. I mean, maybe it's
you've prepared.
You've
prepared. Yeah.
Maybe like the next evolution after Lightning. I would argue, so like Fiat Jeff was like fairly involved in Core Lightning even before I showed up. Yeah. He was like doing a lot of really, I think, good, interesting contribution work in the Lightning ecosystem. Really understood, I think, more than most people how the Lightning spec process worked, how it was done. And then he had sort of a reaction, I would say, almost against that in building the NIPs, and that he didn't want it to be byte level, he wanted it to be JSON specified. So that, I think, is like one of the more obvious sort of reactionary things that happen. Like the Lightning specification has its own custom like byte level thing.
Actually, I have a question about FatJazz that someone asked me, like one of the teacher he asked me recently, like he works so much on Lightning, and yet every time he said that Lightning doesn't work, or it's like he kind of trash Lightning all the time, while he literally been working on it for like 5 or 6 years. So do you know why?
I haven't ever had the opportunity to ask him why that might be. I don't think I honestly don't know. I can imagine it must be some amount. I mean, he always sounds a little frustrated about something. So I'm not sure if he's explained himself, or if there's like I think there's like some historic blog posts where he talks about what he doesn't like about Lightning, but I'm not really familiar with him. It does sort of remind me of like, there's this guy named Eric Wall who comes up every once in a while also. I feel like he has a long history of like fudding Lightning. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, doubt. So sort of just like, I think he came out today, Eric Wall just came out today that he wanted to give Lightning another try. I don't know what that means. I feel like every time he does this, he like comes away being like, it's still terrible. And it's like, okay, what was the point of that exercise? Like, I think one thing about Lightning that people always bash on it for like not having enough money locked into it. That's a big one. So the number's not big enough.
Or it's too big and the liquidity doesn't move, so it's pointless.
It's pointless. It's too centralized in terms of liquidity. Or, my payment got stuck that one time and I've never forgiven XYZ, or I had to pay more money than I wanted to, or it took me a long time to open a channel. Like, people have a litany of reasons. Fine. I think they're all valid. They're all like a critique that usually comes from an experience they've had with the network. So I think they're like, that's all valid criticism. I think one thing that's kind of interesting though about Lightning, so, okay, I'm gonna get this is a little bit of a long-winded thing, but, like Bitcoin came out and it took it a long time to get a bunch of people into the network, right? I would say Bitcoin was a little bit of a slow growth phenomenon. It took people a long time to start mining. It wasn't like a ton of money rushed into the ecosystem. Money rushed into the ecosystem slowly over time, over the course of like 5, 6, 7 years, right? Like it kind of had this opportunity to have like its like nascent growth stage where most people were like, what is that? Like they were very, there's a lot of like attitude of like scoffing about Bitcoin as a project for years and years and years and years, right? And I would say we really even haven't gotten to the point where let's call it like cataclysmic money, like huge amounts of money that have distorting impacts to the network, haven't really even arrived yet. Like we've gotten a lot more money in terms of mining, but it's been kind of a nice growth curve such that like every time it grows, the network has had time to like figure out its bugs and sort of figure out what sort of edge cases there are, such that like if BlackRock, the ETF thing that everyone's talking about these days, no idea when this is going to go live or when people
but it is BlackRock.
So maybe like, that'll be just background noise of something that did or didn't happen. But it's like if someone owned like tons of Bitcoins right now, would the network be okay? And I'm like, yeah, it would totally be okay. Because there's so many people doing mining that are disconnected from that. There's so many people running nodes that are independent of that. Like, what do you care if a Bitcoin transaction is worth X dollars or $0? Like, it's still a distributed ledger. It's still got the same participants in it. It's kind of like this army of people running Bitcoin nodes and doing mining. And it's like it really is kind of this distributed ecosystem, right? Where one person owning a lot of coins, yeah, that gives them a lot of coins. That just gives them the right to move coins on the ledger. It doesn't really grant them any other rights in the system, right? But it took a really long time, I think, before people with lots of money, in order to compete on mining, you kind of really need like really cheap electricity to get into the mining game, or access to like lots and lots and lots of machines that are just hard to get hands on, right? So it was a slow growth thing. And it made it such that big new players coming into this space weren't able to distort the network in a certain direction, et cetera. Okay, what does this have to do with Lightning? Lightning, I think, is really hard to see what's going on, which like people have said means that not as much like money and influence has been pouring into the network. And it's been really slow growth, and everyone looks at the public metrics and like I feel like people are always a little disappointed at what the public metrics are available, right? And it's sort of, people kind of seem to like cite this as a reason that like Lightning isn't as popular. Like, oh, Lightning doesn't have as much money in the ecosystem, therefore it must not be as important as XYZ other protocol, which like has tons more Bitcoin locked into it. I would say that those like people's like, they kind of like overlook the network. I would say I think that's actually pretty positive for Lightning, because it's giving the network the kind of space and like sort of ability to grow, and like for people to spend time figuring out how to get merchants onto Lightning. People to spend time figuring out how to get lots of people to have mobile wallets. Like, what does the mobile wallet landscape look like? It gives lots of time for like new people to kind of try and figure out different things at like lower levels without a lot of money or capital or pressure, like big players, kind of swinging big money around, which can have like weird distorting effects. Like, I think that like the fact that Lightning has sort of been, and it's really hard to get the total number of payments over the network. For all we know, Lightning may be like one of the more successful, like huge payment transfer systems that exist today, but no one has numbers on that because of how private it is. And that makes it really hard, I think, for Lightning to get the attention of like existing players. But I think that's kind of how new successful networks get grown, is slowly over time with small, unimpressive numbers like to begin with, right? You get a whole bunch of new people in really quickly, and then you're gonna have more problems than you can solve, and it'll like fall over for everyone. Whereas I feel like the kind of like almost like organic growth that we've been seeing in Lightning in terms of like new people coming on the scene, new businesses being grown. Like, we have a lot of new entrants right now that want to be LSPs. I think that's arriving at a cool and interesting time, right? Like the LSP movement isn't something you could have done too early. There wouldn't have been enough people to like pay for your services to make it worth it. But now they're coming in because they're seeing that like there's this future where everyone is on it, kind of thing. So I think these people, like the people who have FUD about Lightning, sometimes I feel like they're sort of acting from the level of like it's not as popular as I think it should be yet. Millions and billions of dollars haven't locked themselves into it yet. It's got all these problems. I don't like the players that are doing things. I think they're doing things the wrong way or the way that I wouldn't do them, etc. I think all of that is like valid criticism. I think it is a good reaction to have to certain things, but I also think it's a sign of like kind of this organic and slow strength that, it's sort of like building a slow moving snowball, like juggernaut, right? When it gets big enough that it gets people's attention, hopefully it's got enough speed and is moving fast enough in a certain direction that it's like gonna pick up all this FUD on the way and will end up somewhere interesting.
No, yeah, I think it's you're right, and it's quite crazy to see the evolution. So I've been in Lightning for some time. I'm not a developer. I think you all know that, but because I cannot run a node because I'm just so bad with computing, that I bought the first Casa Lightning node that was like in auto channel creation and auto management. And I was like so happy to be like in the first one on batch, and I was like just plugging my Lightning node, and I was like buying the dice from Nick Carter at the time with Lightning. That was my first buy. I think it was 2018, something like that. It was a mess. Like honestly, it was a mess. But then I saw it like change and see the wallet come and goes. And now that I'm here in El Salvador or anywhere else in the world, and I see everyone using, and every single time it goes through, the payment goes through. One of two just got paid multiple K in Lightning instantly. It works well. So I think you're right. We got really lucky that people didn't attack the network when it was younger, and that we had that time to grow, experiment in a smart way. And I think the more time Bitcoin will grow, the harder it will get to get that time to grow in peace. And like even if you look at Nostr, it was like underground, and suddenly boom, Jack arrived, and everyone is talking about it, and it's like before and after. And I think it's gonna be the same for a lot of protocol in the past. And just enjoy the time you have to work underground, because at some point, if it gets bigger, you will be attacked, and it's gonna be bull market type of excitement.
Also gets more competitive, right? Yeah. Like, getting in and building stuff early before you get a lot more people with more resources and more time, et cetera. Like, this is an opportunity, I think, for people that took a bet on it and spent time and energy learning how it works, can really like kind of make, figure out their own thesis and get like, that expertise in it and start building things that when people finally maybe do start arriving, you'll already be the thing that people can go to, et cetera.
Do you think there is competition between the three implementations?
Oh, I think there's plenty of competition between the three implementations. A lot of it has to do with like what do we think is good for the network. I'm okay, yeah. I think like one of the things is like, I think a lot of the things that I think we tend to like have differences of opinions are is what is the best for the network, what is the best way to grow the network, and also whatever our like private industry like our ideas of how we're going to be making money as companies, et cetera, I think unfortunately sometimes has an impact on like what we think is best. But for a large part, like, it's like I think that competition has been really, really good for the people that are using Lightning. I think like you can kind of go back and look like the history of like PayPal, which was sort of like a new way of doing payments on the web. It's funny, they actually had a lot of the same, they have a lot of the same ideas or like logos or slogans, I should say, that Bitcoin later adopted. Like they would talk about how they're gonna make payments easy for Argentina. And then like a decade later, there's Bitcoin and like we're gonna like free the people of Argentina. I think one of these was actually successful at that goal. The other one just sold it to investors to make a lot of money. I'll let you decide which is which. But like the PayPal story, they talk about, there's this really great, kind of hard to get book, I think it's called PayPal Wars, but it talks about how they were in competition with other payment processing companies that were trying to do the same thing, and how that was like just a really hard, difficult ecosystem to work in, because they would ship something hoping that their competitor didn't ship it, just trying to like have the best features, et cetera, and figure out how to make money as a company. Meanwhile, they're like burning money out the back door on credit card fees, because they were like eating credit card fees for all the people that use their platform. But from the user perspective, it meant that payments on the internet were getting easier and easier and like better to use, because PayPal was like having to keep competing, right? I don't think that like the Lightning ecosystem is necessarily as like tooth and nail sort of thing, but I definitely have seen this like pressure of like, you know, some implementations will ship a thing and then other people will come and do something similar. So like, I think like, you know, the things that are available and what we're able to do as a network just keeps improving, and I think the pace of that is like good and impressive. And I think that is because we're all trying to be like the best implementation, have the best things for users, et cetera. And I think without that competition, I think that we would be at a very different kind of more stagnant place. So, you know, I think that what we were talking about earlier, that's like decentralization of having different teams who have honestly all different perspectives on what they're trying to build Lightning for and who their idea of their end user is. I think the end result though is that we do get, I think there's some frustration with people trying to build services on top of that, because they're like, I don't know what service or what implementation to make my thing work with, and that's a hard problem. But I think at the net end of the day, you've got all these different teams that are all innovating on new things, and so everyone else is like, we're all going to try and make the network better. I think a really great example of this concretely is the splicing thing that happened.
Exactly, yeah.
You guys see, so Eclair, the Eclair team, or I think Async, which is the French.
Sure, we know that.
Yeah, they're a French-based Lightning team. They just launched a new version of the app that has this brand new spec feature called splicing in it. They're the first ones to do that. Core Lightning is working very, very hard. We have a whole like PR that implements it. We're working on getting it merged. Hopefully it'll be in our next release, I think next month, fingers crossed. So that'll hopefully interop with the one that Eclair has shipped. So then there will be 2 Lightning implementations that have it. I know the guy on the LDK team who's furiously working on it, right? So it's like, this is a feature upgrade that we're like a couple implementations have added, and all the other implementations, I think,
We'll need it because it's a game changer.
it's a game changer, right? And without, you know, one of the implementations really like driving that forward, I don't think the network would have gotten that, if that makes sense, like in the timeline that we're getting it, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think the competition is good, and I think that having multiple Lightning implementations while working on one, it means you're constantly stressed about like having to keep up with the Joneses sort of thing. Like it makes, I think, working on an implementation, and you know, you're focused on like what you're working on and what you want to see happen. But I think there is a little bit of pressure to make sure that you're keeping up. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that pressure is good. I think it means that working on these implementations can be a little like exhausting, and you always feel like you're behind because there's a million cool things you want to work on, which is why we need more great developers, which
That's
is why
we are building them.
Base 58 and
Bitcoin.
yeah.
DB. It's a mess internationally because we started as a French company,
Oh, I see,
mostly in France and North Africa, but now that we're doing everything internationally, it's a French name. So DB is like decentralized Bitcoin, discover Bitcoin, disintermediate Bitcoin, discover Bitcoin, descubler Bitcoin. So it's just DB. I feel like that's
DB,
a quick name.
the Bitcoin, DB.org. Yeah, so things that we're doing are trying to get more people into these projects, because there's, you know, every time one implementation adds something, all of a sudden there's more work on all the other implementations that needs to happen.
It's an infinite keep-up. And so what would you say?
Bitcoin jobs program, you know, I'm kidding. Like,
I mean, the goal of the university is to train them autonomously from zero to Lightning Dev and put them into like seminars or your class if they want like more tutoring. And at that point, between the online classes that are like free and open source and available, some grant to get paid courses, and at the end get into a job. This is like the workflow we want for the university, and it's in 5 languages because you don't know what we do. It's in 5 languages, and we're gonna have 25 by the end of the year.
Sick.
So
Cool.
Yeah, it's just we've made it so we can just have all the languages.
I want to add, like, so I mean, I think the pipeline you talked about is a really important one, which is like, how do we get more really great, smart people into the Bitcoin ecosystem and contributing at a code level, and like eventually get a career and a job so they can stay, right? But I think like one thing that with Base 58, another like huge goal of mine, at least with starting to do these classes, is that, Bitcoin and how we move Bitcoin forward is like a consensus-based system, right? And so what that means is that we have conversations and we all have to kind of come to agreement about what we think Bitcoin should head towards, both with like soft forks, like what soft forks are important and why, what we should be adding to the protocol, what needs to be done, et cetera. Those tend to be like fairly public conversations that happen across the ecosystem. I think we as an ecosystem are going to run into trouble, and I think we've kind of seen it with like a lot of our like Bitcoin core devs that people really looked up to and respected for their technical chops. Like Greg Maxwell is a great example. I've been joking every Bitcoin soft fork requires you to sacrifice a core dev at like the pyre kind of thing. Like he gets burned up and he disappears forever. SegWit cost us Greg Maxwell. Gone forever. But like, that sort of understanding of how things work and being able to contribute to the conversation at that level as time goes on in the next decade or the next 2 decades. People start forgetting things in 2 decades. Bitcoin, we're hoping, lasts another 1,000 years, right? We really need institutions like Base 58 that are explaining how the protocol works, why it works that way, how we got there, such that we can get these new voices in the ecosystem, not only of the devs, but maybe even of the people that are like a little, not developers, but want to understand how it works. They hopefully be able to maybe suffer through a Base 58 class and really just get a good appreciation for like how the system works, so that when we as an ecosystem are talking about things we want to add, what the challenges are, how to move forward, there's a greater understanding of what the reality is, so we can have like better conversations.
I totally agree. And when we see that recently people with ordinal stumps, they started talking again about, all right, we need covenants. So how do we get covenants? All right, do we do BAP 300? Do we do BAP 290? And it's like, all right, guys, like we know you want Bitcoin to be more modular, but that's not really what, we shouldn't like push soft fork every time, every day, or even every year. At that point, it's going to be really tough to push soft fork. So we really need a lot of discussion and talented people, and even not, you will have like the talented people who can give you the reason why X or Y, but you need to be able to understand them at a level, and that's where like our education goes through. Like you need to be able to not just follow your favorite podcaster, YouTuber. It's not because I don't know who in the US says something, everyone is gonna follow him because, well, I don't know how Bitcoin works, but he told that, so I trust that guy. It's like, no, Bitcoin is not about trust. Like we have the resources, just study, and maybe you will try to figure out what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, understanding what the reality is gives you like the antidote for like when demagogues stand up and say we should go X or Y direction. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And like when BlockRock is gonna say, hey, we don't take that fork because we don't like it, and we have the money, so you know what? It's just, yeah, we don't agree with you. It's gonna be a whole mess, and we know Bitcoin will have drama at the end of the day. And like we know it's not gonna change anytime soon. And the drama, even at a higher level, is getting here. Is it Taro or RGB? What is the future of all those implementation? Is it a stamper shit? All right, what about ordinals and night fights, So, study.
Yeah, right, because then I think you can at least be a more knowledgeable consumer of all these like updates and opinions, etc. And again, like I think that's only, more people understanding what the truth is of how Bitcoin works is only good for Bitcoin.
That's true. You talked earlier, I go back to the implementation, that you need to make money. I mean, it's obvious, but for the people that didn't get it, Eclair and LND and Blockstream and even like Core Lightning, it's a business at the end of the day. So you are trying to build solutions that do specific things for a specific market, either private or not. I know for Eclair, you mentioned it, they're really focused on Phoenix Wallet because that is what they're trying to make as a perfect product. What would you say is a Core Lightning aim to target, and who should run a Core Lightning node specifically, and like who are you trying to build the product for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Core Lightning as an implementation set out with the goal of being the spec implementation. Right. So we want to be have anytime another team proposes a new spec update or something cool and interesting that will move the entire network forward, we want to be the team that's either proposing that and trying to exemplify it or make it a working test implement, an experimental feature you can try out on Lightning. Or the splicing thing that the async team has really been spearheading. along with us, like we can build with them such that whenever they're ready to send it out, they'll have some assurance that it has a nice spec written, that another team was able to implement it, that we're able to move the network forward together, if that makes sense. So I really like that's really more like the, so like kind of the goal of Core Lightning as implementation is I think a lot more focused on like the network and moving the network forward from a feature perspective, which unfortunately isn't maybe end users so much. But I think like one of the things that we're doing to make that a lot more accessible, we also like really as a Blockstream as an organization really cares about doing Bitcoin the right way, like self-custody, not taking shortcuts in terms of where the keys are and who's holding them. So I think one of the ways that Blockstream I think is really aiming to kind of monetize or like build a product on top of their deep expertise in Lightning has been the Greenlight project, which Christian Decker has been spearheading for a few years at this point. He's been working on that for a long time. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what the Greenlight project is, I guess the little history behind it is Blockstream has a wallet called Green. And so Greenlight is the attempt of like, how do you get Lightning on a mobile wallet in a self-custodial way? The answer that Christian Decker came up with is we're going to run your Lightning node, which has like these always-on requirements and really needs a lot of network connection and bandwidth. We're going to run the node part of your node in the cloud, and we're going to build it in such a way that we can do that in a cost-effective way and make it like highly available. And then we're going to take the keys for that though, so the thing that will actually help you move the money, and we're going to pull it apart out of the server. So there's no secret key material that lives in the server anywhere. It also removes from us running Greenlight the any responsibility we have in terms of we have no right to transfer funds. We are not a custodian. We do not have any like there's as an organization like we don't actually ever touch the money, right? The keys live on your phone or maybe in your wallet, or maybe you have like your wallet, a browser, whatever that has your keys. And then we worked with the Verified Lightning Signer project. I think that's what it's called, Validating Lightning Signer project, VLS. With them to build what we think is like a best-in-class way that your keys can have some intelligence about what is good to sign and what isn't, so they're not just blind signing things the server requests them to sign, because that would be a problem. And so this is like, we're trying to build out infrastructures so that if you're like Breeze, for example, they've built their SDK on top of this Greenlight infrastructure. So anyone who uses the Breeze SDK, for example, can have all of their custody of their node funds and keys in a totally different place from where the node infrastructure is running, which is cool. Yeah, so we're trying to scale Lightning through self-custody. Yeah.
Okay. Makes it clearer for me too, because I know really well Eclair of yours, but yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. How many people are working on Core Lightning right now?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to.
You cannot give it, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Well, I've been on sabbatical since January, so I haven't really been keeping up with like what the maintenance thing is, or even like what the organization is. When I was there in January, I think we had 5 full-time people, maybe 6. Apologies if I'm miscounting anyone in terms of dev. So it's a pretty small dev team that's employed at Blockstream on it. We recently, I think it just got announced this past weekend, Core Lightning has its first like independently funded contributor from OpenSats. So the guy who's been working on the splicing implementation on the Core Lightning side just got fully funded from OpenSats. So I think that's a really big milestone for us, getting like third-party contributors contributing. We also have a whole host of, I think, like part-time contributors. But it's a smaller team, I think. I would say it's like less than 20 people that are working on it full-time and maybe even like part-time. So,
how can our students help?
That's a great question. I think
I say students, but they're senior dev on protocol. Like some of them are good.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that we always need help. Let's see. Supposed to be GitHub issues that say good first issue. So if you wanted an issue to check out, that's a great place. I feel like Rusty would have a great answer to this, and I don't, so I'm feeling a little like ashamed. I feel like playing around with the plugin ecosystem, figuring out how that works, being able to contribute back plugins, like that's something that we really need help with. I think another thing that Core Lightning is really missing, I think that makes our ecosystem just a little harder to build on, is like packages in like the JavaScript side of the world or like the web dev side of the world that make it really easy to talk to your core Lightning node remotely. So we've added a gRPC where our next release is going to have like a HTTP like REST endpoint available now. That's brand new for us, I know. We've also got this really cool thing called LN Socket that does like this over the Lightning, basically communication style stuff. Clams.tech is built on that. But I think we're really missing sort of some of this like the interface between the web tech side and the core Lightning side. So if that's something that you're interested in working on, I guess they can hit me up on Twitter, and maybe I can put you in the right place. We also have a Discord, the Core Lightning Discord, which is a great place to see what people are working on, who needs help, maybe offer up some stuff.
And Built on L2 is also
yeah.
a big project that, I don't know if you know about it, but like, yeah, so Deco Bitcoin is also in communication with Blockstream Built on L2 to try to see how we can work together. So we have the courses of Built on L2 on the university and vice versa. We send the students to Built on L2. And I'm guessing I want to do the same with Base 58. So
that'd be great, yeah.
So I'm trying to get all the data in an easy way to find it. All right, so you know how to work. Because I have the chance to have you, I'm so sorry. But I have a question about Lightning and mostly on privacy, because you mentioned Lightning was really good on privacy. And yet I know that a lot of people say it's not perfect or there is issues. So what is your take on Lightning privacy? What do you think it is and what do we need to improve on that?
Yeah, I think Lightning privacy is really hard to do if you're using a custodial wallet.
Yeah, we're going to take a non-custodial wallet.
Yeah, so assuming you have a non-custodial wallet, maybe I'm like not up to date on what the latest is, but I feel like it's much, much better than on-chain. Making transactions on Lightning, as long as you're using self-custodial stuff and you're like, it's so much better than doing an on-chain transaction. Like the history of it doesn't exist. It's ephemeral. It gets batched up with all the other transactions that you do. No one really should have any idea of like where your payment is going, or like where you're receiving money from. I feel like it's an enormous, and it's decentralized. We've been adding things to the protocol that is making it better. And so I think a lot of the things that we've added, it takes a long time from the protocol to get updated, to get out to everyone else. I think there's still some problems around like UTXO, like for public routing nodes. In order to participate in routing things, you do have to expose where your UTXOs are. I think that's at a different level of privacy though. Like, I think one thing that I need to, I think, maybe spend a little more time thinking about and talking to other experts kind of in the UTXO space. But I think one thing people really like haven't totally, I think people are kind of in the on-chain mindset where if you know what someone's UTXOs are, you can see their payment transactions. And so exposing what your UTXOs are is like a really big problem because it shows where your payments are going. Lightning totally changes that, I think. And I don't think people are totally like updated their mental model of that quite yet. UTXOs show people where the money is, but it doesn't show you where it's moving, who it's going to, where it's coming from, et cetera. So even if someone can see some of your on-chain footprint of your Lightning node, it's much, much more private in terms of who you're actually transacting with, which is like sort of the information data that you want to keep private, I think, at the end of the day.
Okay, well, good answer. Second question, it's the exam part of the interview. Jamming issue.
Channel jamming,
yeah. Channel jamming.
Do
we have a solution?
I think there's a team who's been working at the spec level on some proposals of how to make it not as bad. I don't think we have a solution. I think it's one of those things that, I was talking earlier about how competition moves things forward. I think in terms of like, this also goes for threats, like an active threat definitely moves things faster than like the idea of a threat. I think the thing about jamming is that it's a denial of service attack. So at the end of the day, it really is more of a nuisance and a disruption to your ability to deliver your services of Lightning than it is like in terms of money cost. And sometimes I think those sorts of threats are just like a little bit harder to spend the time, energy, and effort like fixing, especially since jamming is a difficult problem because Should we explain what channel jamming is? I don't know if I have the energy.
No.
Okay.
If you want to know what the channel jamming is, just go on the university, either resources, tutorial, Lightning, channel jamming. You can do a Lightning Sphere 1, we will explain what it is. And if not, resources, Lightning resources, and you will get it. Just search channel jamming on the university, you'll get it.
Yeah. So like, I think we've had a couple proposals of how to fix it. I think it's a matter of getting them spec'd so people know what they're implementing and then getting those solutions implemented. I think it's like mitigations. So we can't fix it. It's things we're going to have to mitigate. And I think that the mitigations are going to be sort of an iterative process where we go one side too far or the other. I think, unfortunately, the reality of channel jamming is that if we don't come up with a good general solution that we make available to most people via the spec process, people will start coming up with custom ways of mitigating it as a problem if and when it becomes an actual problem. And I think that will be more harmful than having like a sort of spec solution to it. So active area of research, if that makes sense. If anyone has a great and brilliant solution to it, let me know. I can put you in touch with the team who's working on it.
All right, 2 more questions. Favorite movie?
My favorite movie? I think the one that I always pull out is, I have a lot of favorite movies. I'm going to go with The Usual Suspects.
All right, that's a good one, actually. And last one is going to be on Bitcoin. What do you want to see implemented next? Either on Lightning or on chain? Is it BIP, about something you were talking about splicing, so maybe something else, like is it layer 3 solution? What would you like?
Yeah, there's 2 things I'm really excited about. The first is APO, or something that'll enable like LN symmetry, which used to be called L2. We're now calling it LN symmetry. Yeah, it's now called, new fancy name is LN symmetry.
It's L2, right?
It is L2, but it's...
Okay, I didn't know the new name.
Yeah, so Core Lightning implemented, our team, we had someone build like basically we have a working spec prototype of LN symmetry on a Core Lightning branch. So someone has built it out and it works and has done like tests on it on the Signet, Inquisition Signet. I would love to see that go in. I think it is such a huge, important update for getting institutional money onto Lightning in a way that I feel comfortable as a spec dev. So I think that pushing APO forward, the protocol at the base layer, is just really, really important. The other thing I'm really excited about is maybe this is like not necessarily Lightning, well, sort of tangentially Lightning related, is the new cluster mempool work that Suhas and Peter Willa have been doing. I am absolutely thrilled and super excited about that. I think it's going to be a very cool and new thing. It's also just like a cool computer science data structure project, and so it's really fun from like a nerd sense. It's just a really cool rethinking, I think, of the way that transactions get selected into blocks and how Bitcoin Core keeps track of that. The really exciting thing about that one is it doesn't require any softworks, et cetera, to roll out. We can just get it fixed, shipped, and out and available to people without hopefully much crying and gnashing of teeth. So.
That's awesome. Lisa, I took way too much of your time, and I know you just fly here, so you're tired. Where can the audience find you? Maybe on Twitter or Telegram? I don't know what it was. Telegram, no, but Twitter, I guess.
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at niftyni, Niftyinei. And then you should also take out base58.school is where you can find out about classes we're doing. We only have 1 class online right now. Most of our stuff is in person because I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want the class to include while I build out the online stuff, but hopefully we'll have a lot more online things soon. We're going to have our first ever Lightning class in Europe around the Plan B forum in October.
Oh, in Lugano.
Yeah.
I will see you there again.
Yeah, I'll be in Lugano, yeah. So if you're in the Europe ecosystem and want to come through the Lightning class, the longer form of the class of what we're doing here in El Salvador this week, check out that opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah. If you have thank you for staying. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I personally enjoyed it. It was really technical. I really liked it. If you have any question for Lisa, put it in the comment section. I cannot guarantee she will read it. She probably won't answer, but do it anyway. It helps for YouTube algorithm. Keep studying, guys. Take Lisa's courses. Come to Lugano Plan B. I don't know when that video will go out, but just, I don't know. And thank you for staying here. Goodbye.